The boardroom at St. Catherine's Hospital smelled of leather and desperation. Maxwell Sterling Blackwell stood before 12 hostile faces, his Tom Ford suit torn at the shoulder, a thin line of blood cruising down his temple from where Richard Thornton's hired thug had caught him off guard in the parking garage 20 minutes earlier. Behind him, Adelaide Grace Harrison clutched a stack of medical illustrations like they were the last pieces of evidence before a firing squad. Thornton's voice dripped with manufactured concern. "Mr. Blackwell, you violated every ethical protocol we hold sacred. I'm calling for your immediate removal as CEO and your expulsion from this board." Maxwell's jaw tightened. He'd spent 2 years building the relationship with this hospital, positioning Blackwell Medical Technologies as their exclusive supplier of neurosurgical devices. 2 years that Thornton was trying to incinerate in a single evening. "Then you'll have to remove me over the truth." Maxwell slid the folder across the mahogany table. "Adelaide, show them." She stepped forward, honey blonde hair escaping from what had been a neat bun 3 hours ago, green eyes burning with determination. Her hands trembled as she distributed copies to each board member. "These are the original test results and illustrations." Her voice didn't waver. "The ones submitted to the FDA were falsified. Someone in this room tried to kill patients to destroy Maxwell's company." Maxwell's mind froze on that moment. Adelaide's defiant stance, his own blood drying on expensive fabric, Boston lights glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything that mattered balanced on the edge of her next words. "And I know exactly who." The world condensed to a pinpoint, then exploded outward into motion and consequence in the beginning of the end of everything he tried to control. But to understand how they'd arrived here, how a billion-dollar CEO and a struggling medical illustrator had become warriors fighting side by side, you had to go back. Back to 6 months earlier, back to a wedding in Boston, back to a desperate bargain made under crystal chandeliers, back to a contract clause that became the most dangerous thing either of them had ever signed. Back to the moment Maxwell Blackwell learned that some variables refused to be controlled. The engineering lab at Blackwell Medical Technologies occupied the 3rd floor of a Cambridge building overlooking the Charles River. Maxwell stood at the prototype table, examining the surgical device that represented 18 months of research and $7 million. October's sunlight turned the polished surfaces of the neurosurgical tool into something almost holy. Davies, his senior engineer, shifted his weight, a tell Maxwell recognized as bad news. "Mr. Blackwell, the FDA wants another round of testing. 6 more months minimum. Then we parallel track." Maxwell's fingers traced the insertion mechanism with precision. "Start clinical trials in Boston, Houston, Seattle. I'll coordinate personally." He rotated the device in the light, spotted the microfracture point Davies had missed despite 2 Stanford degrees. The flaw ran along the stress junction, a weakness that would be catastrophic under real surgical conditions. Maxwell sketched the solution on the whiteboard in 30 seconds. Redistribute the load-bearing architecture, reinforce the composite material, add redundancy. Engineering problems had solutions. Human problems were messier, impossible to reduce to equations and predictable outcomes. "That's brilliant, sir." Davies stared at the whiteboard. "That completely solves it. That's proper engineering." Maxwell turned toward the conference room where the quarterly board meeting waited. "Get the modifications into production. Revise prototypes by end of month." The boardroom reinforced everything Maxwell had learned about power. Those who wielded it rarely deserved it. Wallace, a venture capitalist with family money older than the Commonwealth, cleared his throat. "Your personal life is affecting company image, Maxwell. The divorce, the tabloid coverage. My personal life is irrelevant." Maxwell's voice dropped into the register reserved for shutting down challenges. "Revenue up 34% year over year. FDA approval on timeline. IPO valuation holding at $800 million. Shareholders care about stability. Accusations of being emotionally unavailable, cruel, incapable of basic connection. Maxwell's hands flattened against the table. I built this company from a Somerville garage with an engineering degree and a prototype I machined on equipment I couldn't afford. Shareholders can trust my competence or divest. Silence followed. Wallace sat back, defeated but calculating. Maxwell had won, but victory felt hollow when you went home alone to 6,000 square feet that echoed with absence. His mother's voice through the phone carried affection and exasperation. Maxwell, you missed Sunday dinner again, 3 weeks in a row. He stared at Boston's skyline at dusk. I apologize, Mother. FDA presentation overran, then emergency call with the West Coast team. You're 42 years old. When are you going to meet someone appropriate? The word appropriate carried freight. Boston Brahmin expectations, summer homes, genealogies to the Mayflower. Maxwell had tried appropriate once. It ended with Vanessa in another man's bed, and Maxwell painted as a monster. I tried marriage. The outcome was less than optimal. Vanessa was wrong for you. I said so from the beginning. But there are suitable women in Boston. I have to go. Conference call in 5 minutes. Love you, Mother. He ended the call, stood alone as darkness claimed the city. The framed photograph on his desk showed young Maxwell beside his father, outside the garage where Jonathan Blackwell had built his first medical device company before the stroke took him at 48. Control the variables, manage the risks, never let emotion override calculation. His father had taught him that, even through absence. The penthouse in Beacon Hill represented everything Maxwell had achieved and nothing he wanted. 6,000 square feet of minimalist perfection, glass and steel and furniture chosen for magazine spreads. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Boston Common, providing a view that felt like lonely surveillance. He poured Macallan 18, stood at the windows like a sentinel watching territory that provided no comfort. The montage of his life played through the following days. Working past midnight, running the Charles at 5 a.m., commanding boardrooms, Sunday evenings alone, choosing work over connection because work was predictable. His parents' wedding photo sat on the mantel, Jonathan's arm around young Maxwell, both grinning with joy before learning that time steals everything. Maxwell closed his laptop, displaying the divorce settlement. 2 years reduced to asset division and accusations. Vanessa walked away with $7 million and rights to a memoir painting him as brilliant, successful, monstrous. Maybe she was right. Maybe when you built defenses high enough to keep out pain, they eventually kept out everything else. He finished the whiskey, went to bed alone, dreamed nothing he could remember. Adelaide Grace Harrison's Worcester apartment occupied 480 square feet of crushing space. Morning light illuminated the drafting table, where she'd spent 72 hours sketching anatomical illustrations, detailed enough for medical textbooks, precise enough to guide surgeons where millimeter accuracy meant life or death. Her drawing of the human heart covered the current page, chambers and valves, rendered with precision from understanding both art and medicine. The illustration was beautiful, technically perfect, and represented a Johns Hopkins deadline paying $3,200, covering maybe 8% of the bill stacked on her counter. Her phone vibrated. St. Catherine's Hospital Cardiac Unit. Adelaide's stomach dropped. This is Adelaide Harrison. The nurse's practiced sympathy made everything worse. Miss Harrison, your mother had another episode last night. Dr. Morrison wants to see you today. Fear flashed through Adelaide's chest. Then she pushed it down. I'll be there within the hour. She checked the calendar where deadlines crowded in red ink. Johns Hopkins wanted Chapter 7 by Friday. Mass General needed revisions Monday. American Medical Journal promised payment 3 weeks ago, but the check hadn't arrived, and her rent was 47 days overdue. Adelaide grabbed her portfolio bag, leather worn soft from 5 years carrying her work to a city that didn't care about talent if you couldn't pay bills. The Sacred Heart Diner occupied a corner near the hospital district. Adelaide had worked there 3 years. Regulars knew her name, her story, tipped extra when they remembered. She balanced 6 plates, delivered them to Patterson's booth. "Coffee all around, Mr. P?" Patterson grinned through his gray beard. "You're a lifesaver, Addie." Frank emerged from the kitchen. "Addie, Marie called in sick. Can you cover dinner shift?" Adelaide hesitated. She had the Johns Hopkins deadline, needed 6 hours to finish, couldn't afford to lose sleep, but desperately needed money. "Frank, I have a project due. Double pay. Time and a half after 8. The math was simple and terrible. "Okay, but I need to leave by 10:30. "Deal. You're a lifesaver, kid." The hospital ward smelled of antiseptic and fear. Catherine Harrison looked smaller than last week, as if disease was consuming her from inside. "Sweetheart, you didn't need to rush over. I'm fine." Adelaide kissed her mother's forehead, took her hand, felt bones beneath papery skin. "You had another episode, Mom. Of course I came." Dr. Morrison entered with a tablet, and the expression doctors wore delivering life-changing news. "Ms. Harrison, I need to be direct. Your mother's ejection fraction has dropped to 21%. That's critically low. She needs a transplant very soon. She's on the UNOS list, status 2 priority. With her blood type and donor shortage, it could be 6 months, maybe longer." Morrison hesitated. "And there's another complication. The insurance company denied coverage for the medication protocol that could keep her stable until a heart becomes available." He handed Adelaide papers. "Anthem Blue Cross, coverage denial, amount $47,000. There has to be appeals, financial assistance." Adelaide's voice cracked. "We've tried everything. Unless you can cover it privately." Kate touched her daughter's face, fingers trembling. "Baby, don't worry about me. Maybe it's just my time." "No." Adelaide's voice came out fierce, fueled by grief and terror. "Don't you dare talk like that. We'll figure something out, I promise." The words tasted like lies, but what else could she offer? Adelaide's kitchen table had become a monument to healthcare's cruelty. Medical bills stacked chronologically, collection notices, insurance denials. She calculated totals on yellow legal pad. Previous bills? $300,298. New protocol, $47,000. Total, $347,298. Bank statement, $3,127.43. The math was impossible. Even working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything, Adelaide couldn't earn enough to save her mother. She'd done everything right. RISD scholarship, impressive portfolio, exhausting herself, and was still losing. She allowed herself 60 seconds of despair, then pulled together because falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford. The montage played in grinding repetition, waitressing with forced smiles, sketching at 2 a.m., coffee going cold, hospital visits with false optimism, staring at bills alone, mask dropping. Adelaide Harrison needed a miracle. What she got was Maxwell Blackwell and a contract that would change everything. The Fairmont Copley Plaza in October showcased old money and new ambitions. Crystal chandeliers illuminating Boston's elite, celebrating a wedding, merging 2 textile fortunes. Adelaide stood by the floral arrangement, her Macy's dress screaming working class among designer gowns costing more than her annual rent. She felt every judgmental glance. Her portfolio bag hung from her shoulder like armor, talent and skill, despite lacking wealth and connections. Maria had insisted Adelaide come, childhood friend who'd escaped Worcester through marriage. Adelaide noticed the conversation 15 feet away. St. Catherine's Hospital desperately needs a medical illustrator for their surgical textbook. 6-figure contract, but they need Hopkins or Mayo-level portfolio. Hope flared, bright and painful. This was exactly the opportunity she needed. "Well, hello there, sweetheart. The voice dripped with entitlement and alcohol. Adelaide turned to find Blake Ashford, trust fund narcissist whose family name appeared on Boston buildings, looking at her like prey. "You look lost. Are you with the catering staff?" Nearby guests turned. Whispers spread. Social death in real time. "I think I saw you serving champagne. Be a doll and grab me another scotch, would you?" Adelaide's knuckles went white on her bag. Before she could respond, "There you are, darling." A hand took hers. Warm, firm, proprietary, pulling her against a solid chest in expensive cologne. Maxwell Blackwell appeared, tall and imposing in a tuxedo. His blue eyes locked onto hers with intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm going to ask you to do something unusual. I need you to pretend to be my fiancé, right now." Adelaide's mind went blank. "What? Why? That man just humiliated you publicly. I can humiliate him back and solve both our problems. Trust me for 60 seconds. Please." Something in his voice made Adelaide nod before conscious thought could interfere. Maxwell straightened, pulled her to his side, turned to face the crowd. "Mother, I believe it's time I introduced you to my fiancé. This is Adelaide Harrison." The collective gasp was audible. Maxwell brought Adelaide's hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles, eyes never leaving hers. "We've been keeping it private for 6 months, but I can't hide her anymore. She's too extraordinary." Maggie Blackwell's hand flew to her chest. Cynthia Wentworth turned away, humiliated. Blake's jaw dropped, face reddening. "Darling, I believe they're playing our song." Maxwell led her to the dance floor before anyone could question the announcement. His hands settled on her back with possessive warmth. They moved together, and Adelaide realized their bodies fit perfectly, that the heat between them was undeniable for two strangers playing pretend. "What are you doing? Who even are you?" "Maxwell Blackwell, Blackwell Medical Technologies. I needed escape from my mother's matchmaking. You needed rescue from that asshole. Strategic alliance. By pretending we're engaged? Just for tonight, play along and I'll make it worth your time." The rest unfolded like a fever dream. Maxwell never left her side. He whispered observations that made her laugh, commentary about guests in old money's absurdity. When introducing her to important people, he did it with pride, mentioning her medical illustration work as if it mattered. He deflected snide comments with precision, defending her RISD scholarship as merit rather than lack of privilege. They danced multiple times. With each dance, Adelaide became more aware of the magnetic pull, bodies moving like they'd practiced for years. The current running between them felt dangerously real. Outside the hotel, reality returned with October cold. Maxwell's town car idled, fantasy ending. "You were remarkably convincing tonight. Thank you." "You're not a terrible actor yourself, Mr. Blackwell." Awkward silence. Maxwell produced a business card. "Come to my office Monday morning, 10 o'clock sharp. I have a business proposition that could benefit us both." Adelaide took the card. "What kind of business?" "The kind that solves problems, yours and mine." The Lincoln pulled away, leaving Adelaide alone under street lamps. She stared at the card. Maxwell Sterling Blackwell, Chief Executive Officer, then looked across at St. Catherine's Hospital. Her mother was in that building, heart failing, time running out. And now this billionaire CEO was offering a proposition, spoken in a tone suggesting he knew exactly how desperate she was. Adelaide pocketed the card, pulled her coat tighter, wondered what price Maxwell Blackwell would demand for solving problems that seemed unsolvable. The weekend passed in anxious anticipation. Adelaide worked shifts, finished Johns Hopkins illustrations, visited her mother, researched Blackwell Medical Technologies. She found articles about Maxwell's rise from garage startup to $800 million company, tabloid coverage painting him as brilliant and cold. Nothing explained why he'd rescued her, or what kind of proposition required fake engagement as prelude. Monday morning arrived with autumn rain turning Boston gray. Adelaide dressed in her best professional outfit, Target blazer, white blouse, fraying black pants. She took the T to Cambridge, walked through rain, arrived at Blackwell MedTech looking like exactly what she was, someone who couldn't afford the life she was entering. The lobby was glass and steel, and art probably costing more than her mother's debt. The receptionist directed her to the 30th floor, where windows showcased the Charles River and MIT campus. Maxwell's office occupied the corner, power made architectural. He stood as she entered, gestured to the chair. "Ms. Harrison, thank you for coming. Please sit." Adelaide sat, portfolio bag like a shield. Maxwell slid a manila folder across the desk. "I've taken the liberty of researching your situation." The words hit like a slap. "Excuse me?" "Due diligence. Your mother, Catherine Louise Harrison, age 59, congestive heart failure, ejection fraction 21%, UNOS list, status 2 priority, insurance denied coverage for stabilization medication." He opened the folder, revealing medical records and financial documents Adelaide had never shared. Seeing her desperation laid out clinically made shame burn through her chest. Total accumulated medical debt, $347,298. Your annual income, approximately $43,000. The mathematics don't reconcile. Adelaide stood abruptly. "You investigated my private information? I research all potential business partners thoroughly. Sit down and hear my proposal before you leave." She hesitated, pride demanding she walk out, desperation forcing her to stay. Slowly, she sat. "I'm proposing a 12-month contract. You'll perform duties as my fiancé, transitioning to wife at appropriate time, in all public-facing capacities." The words took a moment to penetrate. "You want to buy a wife?" "I want to hire a professional partner for specific business purposes. There's a significant difference. Let me finish." Adelaide waited as Maxwell laid out his proposal with engineering precision. Public appearances, corporate events, board meetings, family obligations. Maintaining the illusion from Saturday. All to counter his ex-wife's narrative that he was emotionally unavailable and cruel, damaging shareholder confidence. Additionally, and this is legitimate, you'll work as lead medical illustrator for our surgical textbook project. I reviewed your portfolio online. You're exceptionally talented. The compliment shouldn't have mattered amid the calculated coldness, but Adelaide felt something warm bloom anyway. "And in exchange? I will immediately pay all your mother's outstanding medical debt. Wire transfer complete today. She'll be transferred to St. Catherine's VIP cardiac wing under Dr. Morrison's personal care. All future medical expenses covered completely, including transplant." Adelaide's breath caught. Everything she'd been fighting for, offered casually. Additionally, salary for illustration work at market rate, $120,000 annually. Performance bonus upon successful completion of 12-month contract, $500,000. The numbers felt unreal. That's almost $1 million total. That's the market value of your services in compensation for fulfilling contract terms. Adelaide's suspicious nature recognized nothing came free. "What's the catch?" Maxwell slid a tablet across. "Article 11. Read it very carefully." Adelaide took the tablet, scrolled to the relevant section, felt ice crystallize in her chest. Article 11. Emotional Attachment Termination Clause. Contract contingent upon relationship remaining strictly professional. If either party develop genuine romantic feelings, they must confess immediately. Upon confession, contract terminated within 30 days. Performance bonus forfeited. Medical trust for mother remaining irrevocable regardless. Adelaide looked up. "You're creating a contract where if I fall in love with you and tell the truth, I lose everything. But if I fall for you and lie, I'm committing fraud. It's protection against misrepresentation and emotional manipulation. My last marriage taught me emotions are dangerous in partnerships. This is business, purely business. My terms are non-negotiable. Silence filled the office. Adelaide stared at the man across from her, trying to understand what combination of pain had created someone who would write such a clause. Why are you so terrified of feelings? Maxwell's jaw tightened. That's not your concern. It is if I'm supposed to fake loving you. You're supposed to fake liking me professionally. Love is explicitly prohibited by Article 11. He stood. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. Adelaide looked at the contract, thought about her mother's tired smile, and failing heart, and time running out. Two choices: walk away with pride intact and watch her mother die, or sign a contract that might destroy her emotionally but would save the only family she had left. There was no choice. There had never been a choice. I want two addendums before I'll consider signing. Maxwell's eyebrow rose fractionally. I'm listening. First, I want independent legal counsel to verify this medical trust is genuinely irrevocable. Absolute proof that even if this contract terminates, her care continues. Agreed. My attorneys will provide documentation within 24 hours. Second, I want complete creative control over my illustration work. You're hiring me for my talent. I won't be your puppet. Maxwell's slight smile transformed his face. Also agreed. Doctor, Sinclair will coordinate, but final artistic decisions are yours. He extended his hand. Any other terms? Just one question. Yes? Why me? Out of everyone at that wedding, why did you pick me? Maxwell considered, then offered honesty that felt dangerous. You look like someone who needed saving, and someone strong enough not to need it. That combination is rare. Adelaide took his hand, felt the spark that shouldn't exist between strangers negotiating business. She pulled away quickly. She picked up the tablet, found the signature line, positioned her finger. This was the moment. The choice between safety and salvation, pride and pragmatism, walking away with nothing and risking something she couldn't afford to lose. Her finger touched the screen. Digital ink formed her name. Adelaide Grace Harrison. The contract glowed. Accepted. Binding agreement executed. Maxwell's expression revealed nothing, but his voice carried satisfaction as he outlined next steps. Wire transfer by 3 p.m. Moving into the penthouse Saturday. Wardrobe team Monday. First public event in 2 weeks. Welcome to Blackwell Medical Technologies, Ms. Harrison. Maxwell's handshake was firm, professional, final. Oh, and Adelaide? She paused at the door. Remember Article 11. Don't fall in love with me. For your own sake. Adelaide walked out into rain that had turned to downpour. She stood on the Cambridge sidewalk, contract executed, her mother's life saved, her own heart now subject to a clause designed to prevent the very thing that made any of this worth surviving. 6 months remaining. Half a year to maintain professional boundaries while living with a man who demonstrated he understood her desperation well enough to exploit it. Half a year to fake affection while prohibited from feeling it. Adelaide laughed, the sound swallowed by rain and traffic. The game had one rule: don't fall in love. But hearts don't follow rules, and Maxwell Blackwell was about to learn that some things you can't control, no matter how carefully you write the clauses meant to contain them. The penthouse felt like a museum designed by someone who'd confused minimalism with emotional sterility. Adelaide stood in the entrance hall Saturday morning, single suitcase containing everything she owned that mattered, while Maxwell waited in the living room rather than greeting her at the door. A power dynamic established before she'd crossed the threshold. Your quarters are in the East Wing. He moved down the corridor without preamble. I'll show you now so we can establish boundaries immediately. The suite was larger than her Worcester apartment, all cream walls and designer furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. Bedroom, bathroom with soaking tub, walk-in closet already filled with clothes she hadn't chosen, sizes that fit because he'd researched that too. Everything perfect, impersonal, screaming, temporary. But then Maxwell opened a door she'd assumed was another closet, and Adelaide's breath caught. The room beyond held north-facing windows flooding space with artist light, a professional drafting table positioned perfectly, art supplies arranged with care on custom shelving. Someone had studied her apartment, understood her needs, replicated her workspace with upgrades she dreamed about, but never imagined affording. "You set this up for me? You'll need proper workspace for the textbook project." Maxwell's tone stayed neutral, but something flickered across his expression. Satisfaction, gone before she could identify it. "Dr. Sinclair will brief you Monday." The crack in his armor sealed immediately as he reverted to logistics. His suite occupied the west wing, physical distance maintaining appropriate separation. He handed her a tablet displaying her schedule, color-coded and optimized, every public appearance for the next 12 months, mapped like military campaign. First event is the hospital gala in 2 weeks. Wardrobe team arrives Monday at 9. His blue eyes met hers with clinical assessment. Questions? Adelaide scrolled through the schedule, each entry a reminder she'd contracted away her autonomy. "What do I call you? In public, I mean." "Maxwell is fine. We're engaged. Maintaining consistency prevents slip-ups." "And in private?" Maxwell's pause lasted too long. "Also Maxwell. Simpler to stay consistent than risk mistakes." The dinner that followed was exercise in awkward wealth. Private chef preparing Italian cuisine for 2 people who ate at opposite ends of a table designed for 12. Silence stretched between them, broken only by silverware against china, until Adelaide decided 12 months of this would drive her insane. "This is delicious. The osso buco." Chef Marco trained in Florence. Automatic, conversational muscle memory devoid of engagement. More silence. Adelaide pushed past discomfort. "So why did you really need a fake fiancé, besides the ex-wife's book?" His jaw tightened, defensive walls rising. "I told you, company image required stabilization. No one builds a company worth 800 million without understanding image management perfectly." Adelaide leaned forward. "There's something else, something personal." Maxwell set down his fork with precision. "You're perceptive. I observe people the way you observe engineering problems, looking for what doesn't fit." She waited, letting silence work for her. "My mother," the admission came reluctantly. "She's been aggressively matchmaking since the divorce, introducing me to appropriate women from appropriate families. I was losing patience with the charade." "Like Cynthia Wentworth?" "Like 24 over 18 months, each more vapid than the last." Maxwell's slight smile transformed his face. "So yes, I hired you partially to get my mother off my back about settling down with someone from our social stratum. Couldn't you just tell her to stop?" "You've met my mother. The word stop doesn't exist in Margaret Blackwell's vocabulary. She's been managing Boston society for 40 years. The shared moment of understanding surprised them both. 2 people trapped by family expectations, using different strategies for survival. "My mother's the opposite. She'd be thrilled if I dated anyone. She thinks I work too much, that I'm sacrificing my youth for her medical bills." Adelaide's voice caught. "She doesn't understand I'd sacrifice anything to keep her alive." Maxwell's expression shifted, something like recognition passing through his eyes before the walls rebuilt. "That kind of loyalty is rare." He stood abruptly, ending the connection before it could develop into something dangerous. "I have work to review. Good night, Adelaide." She watched him retreat to his wing, disappearing behind a door that might as well have been fortress wall. The vast penthouse suddenly felt cavernous, all that space unable to fill the absence his departure created. Adelaide finished dinner alone, explored her suite, stood at the window overlooking Boston Common at night. Somewhere out there, her mother slept in a bed Adelaide's desperate bargain had made comfortable. The price was 12 months of performance, in Article 11 hanging over every interaction, every moment of chemistry. This was going to be the longest year of her life. Monday arrived with the wardrobe team, 5 people who descended like a tactical unit assigned to transform working-class waitress into billionaire's fiancé. They measured and photographed while discussing her body like architectural problems. The clothes filled the closet, designer labels, price tags that would have covered 6 months' rent, everything tailored to fit a life she was borrowing. By 10 o'clock, she stood in the Blackwell MedTech conference room, dressed in business casual costing more than her car, facing Dr. Victoria Sinclair for the first time. Sinclair was blonde perfection in a white coat, Yale credentials on the wall, blue eyes assessing Adelaide with clinical coldness suggesting competition. "So you're the mysterious fiancé." Sinclair's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Maxwell has been remarkably secretive. We had no idea he was seeing anyone." Adelaide recognized the subtext. Sinclair had expected to be the one, had positioned herself as logical, romantic partner, was now dealing with unexpected obstacle. "I'm also the medical illustrator for your textbook project. Maxwell mentioned you'd be coordinating technical specifications. We'll see if you're qualified." Sinclair pulled up schematics on the wall screen, complex surgical device. "We need anatomical illustrations showing insertion paths through the skull base. Can you handle that level of precision?" Adelaide studied the schematics with focused intensity, from years translating medical concepts into visual clarity. The device was innovative, minimally invasive approach that would revolutionize procedures. But the insertion angle had a flaw, subtle but potentially catastrophic. "You have a problem." Adelaide moved to the whiteboard, sketched quickly. "This insertion angle risks the internal carotid artery. See here, where the device passes through the cavernous sinus? Any deviation causes hemorrhage that could kill the patient before the surgical team realizes." The engineering team leaned forward, surprise replacing skepticism. Sinclair's expression shifted from dismissive to reluctantly impressed. "She's right." The lead engineer's voice carried respect. "We missed that because we focused on bone structures rather than vascular proximity. Critical catch." From the doorway, Maxwell's voice carried quiet satisfaction. "Which is exactly why I hired her. Talent recognizes problems, credentials miss." He'd been watching. When their eyes met across the conference room, something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe pride, certainly awareness extending beyond contractual obligations into territory Article 11 was designed to prevent. The following weeks established patterns that would define their coexistence. Mornings began with coffee preparation that became ritual, Adelaide making café con leche while Maxwell pulled espresso shots. Maxwell left the Wall Street Journal on the counter. Adelaide found herself reading business despite never caring before. She left the New Yorker beside his coffee. He started keeping articles about medical innovation he thought might interest her. Small gestures, meaningless on their surface, that accumulated into something resembling domestic partnership. They discussed cases over breakfast, argued about healthcare policy without real heat, discovered shared frustration with bureaucracy valuing profit over patience. Late nights found Adelaide in her studio, while Maxwell reviewed contracts in his study. Sometimes he'd appear around midnight, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, claiming he'd made too much. They'd talk while she worked, his questions revealing genuine interest in her artistic process. The almost touches became frequent, his hand on her back guiding her through doorways, her fingers brushing his reaching for the same newspaper section. Bodies in proximity that felt deliberate even when it wasn't. The chemistry hadn't diminished. Proximity had amplified it into constant awareness that made Article 11 feel like torture. The hospital gala arrived with performance anxiety. Adelaide had been transformed, emerald marquesa gown hugging curves strategically, hair in elegant updo, Harry Winston diamonds borrowed and insured for more than her mother's debt. She studied herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Polished and confident, and entirely unlike the waitress humiliated 2 months ago. Maxwell's reaction when she emerged violated their professional arrangement. He froze mid-conversation on his phone, eyes tracking her movement with focus that made her skin warm. When he finally spoke, his voice carried slight rasp of someone whose control had slipped. That's more than acceptable. That's exceptional. Just acceptable? Adelaide raised an eyebrow. I was expecting adequate, maybe satisfactory. His laugh surprised them both, genuine amusement replacing calculated distance. Exceptional, then, if we're being precise. In the town car heading to St. Catherine's, Maxwell briefed her on key players. Board members, hospital administrators, society matriarchs who would judge her worthiness. But his hand found hers in the darkness between streetlights, squeeze of reassurance that felt instinctive. You'll be fine. Just be yourself. The woman who caught a critical design flaw in 30 seconds. Intelligence is respected in these rooms, even if breeding matters to the dinosaurs. The ballroom glittered like the wedding where this started, crystal and champagne and diamonds. But this time Adelaide wasn't an outsider. She was Maxwell Blackwell's fiancée, woman who commanded attention because of who stood beside her, his hand never leaving her waist or back or arm in possessive intimacy. He introduced her to Richard Thornton, board chair whose distinguished gray hair and tailored suit couldn't hide predatory calculation in his eyes. Charming to meet you, my dear. Maxwell certainly surprised us. Thornton's smile was reptilian. I understand you're working on our textbook project. How delightful that romance and business have aligned so conveniently. The implication was clear. Adelaide secured her position through feminine wiles, was decoration rather than contributor. Before Adelaide could respond, Maxwell intervened with surgical precision. Adelaide is lead illustrator because she's the best in New England, probably the country. Her portfolio speaks for itself, which is more than most people in this room can claim. His voice carried edge that made Thornton step back. We're fortunate she agreed to work with us despite offers from Hopkins and Mayo. He guided Adelaide away, his jaw tight with anger that seemed disproportionate to casual insult. They found refuge on the terrace overlooking the city, October air cold enough that Adelaide shivered. You didn't have to defend me like that. I can handle snobs like Thornton. I know you can. Maxwell shrugged out of his tuxedo jacket, draped it over her shoulders with gentleness, contradicting his ruthless persona. But you shouldn't have to. Not at an event I asked you to attend, wearing a ring I put on your finger, playing a role that benefits my company. The ring had appeared 3 days ago, platinum and diamond worth more than most people's cars. Adelaide had stared at it for an hour before putting it on. String quartet music drifted through open doors. Vivaldi transformed into soundtrack for their strange partnership. Maxwell's expression softened as he looked at her, jacket dwarfing her frame, diamonds catching terrace lights. Dance with me? His voice was quiet, almost vulnerable, stripped of usual command. Adelaide knew she should refuse, should maintain boundaries already dangerously blurred. But the champagne and music, and the way he was looking at her, all conspired against wisdom. She let him pull her close, his hands settling on her back, their bodies finding rhythm together. Boston glittered below, city lights reflecting off the Charles River. Maxwell held her closer than strictly necessary, his breath warm against her temple. Everything about the moment crossing lines their contract prohibited. When Adelaide looked up, she found his gaze already on her face, intensity that made her breath catch. He leaned in fractionally, eyes dropping to her lips before rising back to meet hers. The question hung unspoken. Cross this line or retreat to safety. Risk everything or protect the arrangement, keeping her mother alive. Maxwell pulled back abruptly, stepping away with jerky motion of someone fighting instinct through sheer will. His voice came out rougher than usual. We should get back inside. People will notice our absence and draw conclusions we're not prepared to address. The drive home happened in thick silence, both processing how close they'd come to violating the clause protecting them from their own chemistry. Adelaide stared out the window at Boston, passing in streaks of light, Maxwell's jacket still around her shoulders. In the penthouse, they retreated to separate wings without polite goodnights, both needing distance to rebuild walls that had cracked. Adelaide lay awake for hours, skin still tingling from where he'd held her, mind replaying the moment he'd almost kissed her. She was falling for him, maybe had been falling since that first night when he'd rescued her, with audacious lie becoming truth. And if she fell completely, if she couldn't hide it, if Article 11 triggered, her mother would still be cared for, but Adelaide would lose the performance bonus, would lose whatever this strange partnership was becoming, would lose Maxwell before she'd fully understood what having him meant. The work consumed them both as November bled into December. Adelaide spent 12-hour days perfecting illustrations, her drafting table covered in anatomical sketches. Maxwell buried himself in FDA submissions and investor presentations, but they still found each other in the margins. Breakfast conversations running too long, coffee deliveries at midnight, moments when his hand would rest on her shoulder, reviewing her work, and neither would acknowledge that the touch lasted longer than necessary or felt more intimate than professional. Doctor, Sinclair noticed, her icy professionalism cracking into something uglier as she watched Maxwell's attention focus on Adelaide with intensity he'd never shown his CMO. During meetings, Sinclair's comments grew sharper, professional jealousy manifesting as subtle undermining. "Are you certain that's anatomically accurate?" Sinclair would question flawless illustrations. "Perhaps someone with more medical training should review it." Maxwell shut down the challenges with increasing impatience, making clear Adelaide's decisions were final, and questioning her competence questioned his judgment. But the dynamic created tension, Sinclair's wounded pride manifesting as obstacles. The breaking point came during December morning when Adelaide woke with scratchy throat and pounding headache. She pushed through anyway, knowing Maxwell had critical board luncheon where she was expected to perform devoted fiancé role. By noon, she was sweating through designer dress, vision tunneling, maintaining composure through stubborn will. Mid-lunch, the room tilted sideways. Adelaide gripped the table edge, fighting unconsciousness. Across the room, Maxwell's head snapped up with predatory focus, reading her distress through whatever connection had developed. He was moving before she could protest, crossing the space in strides, violating all social convention, his hand catching her elbow with firm grip. "Excuse us, my fiancé is unwell. We're leaving immediately." The conference room erupted in murmurs Maxwell ignored, his entire focus on Adelaide as he guided her toward the exit with careful precision. She tried to protest, but words wouldn't form around the fever spiking into dangerous territory. In the car, his hand pressed against her forehead. "You're burning up. 102 at least. Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" "Didn't want to miss the meeting. Board approval. Can wait." Maxwell's jaw was set. "You could have collapsed in front of shareholders. That's unacceptable risk for a meeting that can be rescheduled." Back at the penthouse, Maxwell transformed into caretaker with focused intensity. He took her temperature, 102.4 degrees, made diagnosis of influenza, then did something that shocked Adelaide. He called his assistant and canceled his afternoon schedule, including surgery consultation he'd been preparing for weeks. "You're canceling surgeries for me? I'm ensuring my investment in this partnership remains healthy. Get in bed. That's not a request." He brought soup, ensured she took medication on precise schedule, checked her temperature with regularity of nurse monitoring critical patient. The care was brisk, professional on surface, but Adelaide wasn't fooled. Maxwell Blackwell didn't cancel surgeries for business arrangements. This was something else, something violating Article 11. Night brought fever spike, dragging Adelaide into delirious half-consciousness, nightmares of medical bills and dying mothers, and contractual clauses turning into monsters. She surfaced from one nightmare to find cool hand on her forehead, voice cutting through fever confusion. "Shh, just the fever. You're safe. I'm here. Try to rest." Adelaide forced her eyes open, found him sitting in the chair beside her bed, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded, vigil he'd apparently been keeping for hours. Even through fever, she could see the worry etched in lines she'd learned to read. His hand remained on her forehead, thumb stroking her temple in soothing rhythm that was pure, unconscious tenderness. The gesture was intimate, caring, everything their contract said he shouldn't feel. Adelaide watched understanding dawn on his face as he realized what he was doing, saw horror flash through his eyes before he snatched his hand back. He stood abruptly, backing toward the door. "Your fever's breaking. You'll be fine by morning." Maxwell fled, leaving Adelaide alone with skin that still tingled from his touch, and certainty that Article 11 had just been violated in spirit, if not letter. He'd felt something real, allowed vulnerability to override control, and the terror that realization caused was almost as revealing as the tenderness itself. They couldn't keep doing this, pretending proximity meant nothing, that chemistry was manageable, that 12 months of performance wouldn't become something genuine and prohibited. But they had no choice except to try. Recovery took 3 days, during which Maxwell avoided Adelaide with dedication of man trying to outrun his own heart. They communicated through texts despite living in the same penthouse, traded information without breakfast conversations that had become ritual. The distance was strategic and obvious, and completely ineffective at eliminating the awareness that had crystallized during her illness. When Adelaide finally returned to work, Sinclair was waiting with the particular smile of someone who'd been planning attack and found perfect opening. The CMO cornered Adelaide in the conference room before morning meeting. "I wanted to give you advice, woman to woman." Sinclair's expression was false sympathy. "Maxwell has a pattern. Brilliant, intense focus on new projects, then complete detachment once novelty wears off. I've watched it happen with companies, technologies, people. You're not special, Adelaide. You're just temporary." The words hit harder than they should because they echoed Adelaide's own fears. "This is professional partnership, nothing more." "Is it?" Sinclair leaned closer, predatory instinct sensing weakness. "Because I've seen the way he looks at you, and I've read Article 11. Such an interesting clause. Almost like Maxwell knew this would happen. Like he's done this before and learned to protect himself legally from emotional complications." Adelaide's stomach dropped. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I? Ask him about Victoria Matthews, the last woman he hired as business partner. See if he tells you the truth about how that ended." She swept out, leaving Adelaide frozen with questions she knew she shouldn't ask, but couldn't suppress. Maxwell had done this before. Hired someone under similar arrangement? How had it ended? And why had Article 11 been created? Maxwell found her 20 minutes later, lost in spiral of doubt Sinclair had deliberately cultivated. His expression shifted to concern as he read whatever her face was showing. "What happened? Did Sinclair say something?" "Who's Victoria Matthews?" The question came out more accusing than Adelaide intended. Maxwell went very still. "Sinclair told you about Victoria?" "She told me you have a pattern. That I'm not special, just temporary. That Article 11 exists because you've done this before and needed legal protection." Adelaide's voice rose. "Is that true? Am I the second woman you've hired as fake fiancé?" "You're the first." Maxwell's jaw was tight. "Victoria was a project manager I dated briefly 3 years ago. It ended badly. Sinclair has twisted that into narrative serving her agenda of undermining your confidence." "Why should I believe you? I signed a contract with someone I barely know, moved into his home, let him rescue my mother, all based on trust that he's been honest." "About everything," Maxwell cut her off, closing the distance until they were inches apart, his intensity burning away her doubts through sheer force of certainty. "I have never lied to you, Adelaide. Not once. You want the truth? Victoria wanted more than professional relationship. When I couldn't give it to her, she sued me for emotional damages and harassment, claiming I'd led her on. The case was dismissed because it was baseless, but it cost me 6 months and $2 million in legal fees and taught me to put boundaries in writing before they could be weaponized. The raw honesty was undeniable. Vulnerability he was offering despite how much it cost him. Adelaide felt her anger drain away, replaced by understanding of what Article 11 actually protected. Not his heart, but both of them from complications that could destroy more than their arrangement. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have assumed. You had every right to question. This entire situation is built on transaction rather than trust. But Adelaide, for what it's worth, he paused, weighing his next words. You're not temporary. You're not a pattern. You're something I didn't expect and don't know how to handle, which terrifies me significantly more than any board meeting or FDA review I've ever faced. The confession hung between them, dangerous and true, violating Article 11 in spirit while technically maintaining its letter. They stared at each other across the conference room, future uncertain in ways that had nothing to do with contracts and everything to do with feelings neither could afford but couldn't prevent. Adelaide was the one who broke first, stepping back before the moment could become something more explicit. We should get to the meeting. Board's waiting. Maxwell nodded, professional mask sliding back with visible effort. But his hand found hers as they walked to the boardroom. Squeeze of connection that said everything they couldn't speak aloud. 4 months down, 8 to go. Halfway through arrangement that was supposed to stay transactional and had already become anything but. Christmas approached with relentless inevitability. Maggie Blackwell insisted on family dinner at her Brookline estate, invitation that was really command performance. They drove through December snow, Maxwell's tension evident in white knuckles on steering wheel. My mother can be intense. If she asks invasive questions, deflect rather than fabricate. She has uncanny ability to detect lies. You mean she'll grill me about wedding dates and grandchildren? Among other things, she's been pushing me toward appropriate marriage since my father died. You represent either solution to that pressure or confirmation I've lost my mind choosing someone outside our social sphere. Maxwell glanced at her. For the record, you're far more appropriate than anyone she suggested. Smarter, certainly. More genuine. Actually accomplished on your own merit. The compliment warmed Adelaide more than it should have. She studied his profile in the dashboard lights, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the slight silver at his temples. Details she'd been cataloging without permission for months. Maggie's home was exactly what Adelaide expected. Georgian, colonial, whispering old money, furniture in the family for generations, art belonging in museums. Maggie appeared in the foyer, elegant in cashmere and pearls, assessing Adelaide with laser focus, missing nothing. So this is Adelaide. My son has been remarkably secretive. We're all dying to know how you captured the heart of Boston's most eligible and emotionally unavailable bachelor. Maxwell's hand found Adelaide's back, anchoring gesture that had become instinctive. Adelaide is lead illustrator on our surgical textbook. We bonded over shared commitment to medical innovation and mutual frustration with bureaucratic inefficiency. How romantic, Maggie's tone suggested she found it anything but. Dinner is ready. I hope you like duck, Adelaide. It's Jonathan's, Maxwell's father's, favorite recipe. I still make it every Christmas even though he's been gone a decade. The dinner was endurance test disguised as family gathering. Maggie asked questions designed to expose cracks in their story. How they'd met, when they'd fallen in love, future plans. Adelaide navigated the interrogation with precision, sticking close to truth while omitting contract details. But it was Maxwell who surprised her, defending their relationship with fierce protectiveness that seemed more genuine than performance. When Maggie questioned whether Adelaide understood what marrying into their family required, Maxwell's response was immediate. Adelaide understands perfectly well that marrying me means dealing with relentless social pressure and invasive questions about her worthiness based on metrics that don't matter. She's handling it with considerably more grace than I would show. His voice was steel wrapped in silk. She's brilliant, talented, kind, and strong enough to build a life from nothing while supporting a dying mother. That makes her more qualified to be in this family than most people I've met who were born into it. Silence followed, broken only by silverware against china. Maggie stared at her son with expression Adelaide couldn't read. Surprise, certainly, but also something that looked like approval. Well, I suppose that answers my question about whether you actually care for her or if this is another strategic calculation. Maxwell's hand found Adelaide's under the table, fingers lacing with hers. I care for her, more than I expected to, more than is probably wise given our circumstances. The confession violated Article 11 so explicitly that Adelaide stopped breathing, waiting for Maxwell to recognize his mistake and backtrack. But he didn't. He sat there holding her hand, looking at his mother with defiant certainty, claiming feelings he'd contractually agreed not to develop. Maggie's smile transformed from calculating to genuine, approval reaching her eyes. Good. It's about time you let yourself feel something real after that disaster with Vanessa. Adelaide, you're welcome in this family, not because you've earned it through appropriate bloodlines, but because you've apparently accomplished the impossible, making my son happy. The drive home happened in stunned silence, neither addressing what Maxwell had just confessed. But his hand never left hers, even when he needed it for driving, as if letting go would sever connection that had become more essential than safety. Back at the penthouse, they stood in the living room, Christmas lights from the city creating constellation through windows. Adelaide knew she should retreat to her wing, should let the evening end before they crossed lines Article 11 prohibited. But Maxwell was looking at her the way he had on the terrace that night, intensity that made her pulse race. What you said to your mother, Adelaide started, but Maxwell closed the distance, his hands framing her face with gentleness, contradicting his usual controlled precision. Was true. Every word. His voice was low, rough, stripped of professional distance. I know this violates Article 11. I know confessing these feelings should trigger contract termination, but I can't keep pretending this is just business when you're the first thing I think about each morning and the last thought before I sleep. When your safety matters more than any board meeting, when touching you feels more necessary than breathing. Adelaide's heart hammered. Maxwell, if we acknowledge this, we lose everything. We lose the performance bonus and the pretense that this was ever just transaction. He leaned closer, breath warm against her lips. But we'd gain something more valuable. We'd gain truth. We'd gain each other, if you want that. If you feel even fraction of what I'm feeling. I feel it, the admission came out whispered. I've been feeling it for months, fighting it every day because Article 11 said I had to choose between honest feelings and my mother's life. But Maxwell, if you're confessing now, his mouth captured hers before she could finish. Kiss that was desperate and tender and worth every consequence. Adelaide melted into him, hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with all the suppressed longing of months spent denying attraction that had been inevitable from that first night. Maxwell held her like she was precious and necessary, deepening the kiss until Adelaide forgot how to breathe. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and shaken, reality crashed back with implications. Article 11 was now officially violated. Maxwell had confessed feelings, Adelaide had reciprocated, and the contract specified immediate termination within 30 days. What happens now? Adelaide's voice shook. Maxwell's expression was determined, no trace of regret. Now we figure out how to make this real. No contract, no performance. Just us, if that's what you want. It's what I want. Adelaide realized truth as she spoke it. But the performance bonus doesn't matter. Maxwell cut her off, thumb brushing her jaw. Your mother's medical trust is irrevocable. That was always non-negotiable, regardless of contract status. The bonus and company position are forfeit under Article 11 terms. But Adelaide, I don't need employee, I need partner. Real partner, not contracted one. The world tilted sideways as Adelaide processed the implications. Maxwell was choosing her over contractual protections he'd insisted were essential. Was risking vulnerability he'd spent years avoiding. Was offering genuine relationship instead of business arrangement. Before she could respond, his phone exploded with emergency alerts. Maxwell checked the screen, expression shifting from tender to thunderous. He held it up so Adelaide could see. News article with headline that made her stomach drop. Blackwell MedTech under FDA investigation following device malfunction claims. What is that? Adelaide's voice came out sharp with sudden fear. Maxwell's jaw clenched as he scrolled, face draining of color. Someone falsified our test data, made it look like the device is unsafe. If this stands, the FDA will pull approval, and the company is finished. He looked at Adelaide with dawning horror. Your illustrations, the ones we submitted to FDA, they've been altered. Someone replaced your originals with falsified versions showing incorrect anatomical placement. That's impossible. Adelaide pulled out her own phone, accessing the FDA submission files. But Maxwell was right. The illustrations bore her signature style, but showed device positioning that was anatomically wrong, dangerously wrong, the kind of errors she would never make. Someone's sabotaging the company. Maxwell's voice was cold fury. And they're using your work to do it. If the FDA traces this back, you could face criminal charges for submitting falsified medical documentation. The kiss, the confession, the momentary joy of choosing each other. All of it evaporated in the face of crisis, threatening to destroy everything Maxwell had built and implicate Adelaide in fraud she hadn't committed. They stood in the penthouse living room, Christmas lights outside mocking the darkness closing in. 4 months of performance had become real. Article 11 was violated. And now someone was systematically destroying Blackwell MedTech while framing Adelaide for medical fraud that could send her to prison. The game had changed. The stakes were no longer just about contract clauses or financial security. They were about survival, reputation, and fighting together against threat neither had seen coming. Maxwell and Adelaide against the world, just when they'd finally admitted they wanted to face that world together. But first, they had to survive. The crisis unfolded with methodical precision of controlled demolition. By Monday morning, 3 major news outlets had picked up the FDA investigation story, each article featuring those falsified illustrations bearing Adelaide's signature. By Tuesday, shareholders were demanding emergency board meeting. By Wednesday, Maxwell's phone wouldn't stop ringing with attorneys, reporters, and investors using words like fraud and criminal negligence with casual certainty of people who'd already decided guilt. Adelaide moved through the penthouse like ghost haunting scene of her own destruction. The illustrations displayed across Maxwell's home office screens, her style, her technique, but anatomical errors so egregious they suggested either gross incompetence or deliberate sabotage. The device placement shown would perforate the carotid artery, cause hemorrhage, kill patients. No competent medical illustrator would make these mistakes, which meant someone had taken her original work and altered it with enough skill to fool casual observers while damning her to anyone with anatomical knowledge. I need to see the original files. Adelaide's voice was steady despite panic clawing at her chest. The ones I submitted before anyone could have accessed them. If we can prove these aren't my originals. Maxwell was already pulling up the secure server, his fingers moving across the keyboard with frustrated speed. But when he accessed Adelaide's project folder, his expression went from determined to devastated in seconds. They're gone. Every original file you created, every backup, every version history, wiped completely. That's impossible. Adelaide leaned over his shoulder, scrolling through directories that should have contained months of her work. The server has redundant backups, automatic version control. You can't just delete everything without leaving traces. Unless you have admin-level access and know exactly how to cover your tracks. Maxwell's jaw was set in a particular way that meant he was calculating threats and responses with speed of combat veteran. This wasn't amateur hour. Someone with inside knowledge of our systems did this deliberately. The implications were crushing. Whoever had sabotaged them understood Blackwell MedTech's infrastructure intimately, had access to secure servers, possessed skills to alter medical illustrations convincingly, and held enough malice to frame Adelaide for fraud that could destroy her career and freedom. The list of people with that combination of access and motive was distressingly short. Sinclair. Adelaide breathed the name like a curse. She has admin access as CMO. She knows the systems, has medical knowledge to make convincing alterations, and she's made clear she resents my relationship with you. Maxwell shook his head, expression grim. Sinclair is vindictive, but this is too sophisticated for personal grudge. This is coordinated attack on the company's valuation, timed perfectly with our IPO expansion plans. Someone stands to gain financially from our stock price collapsing. He pulled up trading data, fingers flying across screens as he traced unusual market activity. What he found made his face go pale. 3 weeks ago, someone took a $5 million short position on Blackwell MedTech stock. If our company fails, they make tens of millions in profit. Who? Adelaide's voice was sharp with fear and fury. Maxwell's eyes darkened as recognition hit. Richard Thornton, board chair, the man who's been pushing for my removal since the scandal broke. The pieces assembled with sickening clarity. Thornton had motive, massive financial gain from short-selling stock before destroying the company. He had access. Board chair position gave him entry to systems and personnel. He had opportunity, months to plan and execute sabotage that would appear to come from Adelaide rather than internal corruption. And he had accomplice in Vanessa, Maxwell's ex-wife, whose tell-all memoir was timed to drop simultaneously with the FDA investigation, creating perfect storm of negative publicity. We need proof. Maxwell was already pulling files, building case with focused intensity of someone fighting for survival. Banking records, server logs, communication between Thornton and whoever altered your illustrations. If we can trace the chain of evidence. His phone erupted with incoming call from Jennifer, his assistant. Maxwell answered on speaker, and Jennifer's voice carried barely controlled panic. Mr. Blackwell, emergency board meeting has been called for tonight. 8 o'clock at St. Catherine's Hospital boardroom. Thornton is moving to have you removed as CEO and is demanding Adelaide's immediate termination and prosecution for fraud. On what timeline? Maxwell's voice was ice, fury contained behind professional precision. They're voting tonight. If the board supports Thornton's motion, you'll be removed effective immediately, and Adelaide will be turned over to federal authorities for investigation. Jennifer paused, then added quietly, Sir, I don't think we can win this. Thornton has been building support for weeks. He has the votes. Maxwell ended the call, stood motionless for a beat that stretched into eternity. Adelaide watched emotions flicker across his face. Rage, calculation, determination, and underneath it all, fear that this time he couldn't engineer solution through sheer force of will. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight of decisions made. We have 7 hours to build case against Thornton and prove you were framed. If we fail, I lose the company I spent 15 years building, and you face federal charges that could send you to prison. He turned to face her fully, blue eyes burning with intensity that made her breath catch. I need you to trust me completely. Everything we're about to do operates in legal gray areas that could make things worse if we're wrong. But if we're right, we bring down Thornton and save your company. Adelaide's voice was steadier than she felt. What do you need me to do? The plan Maxwell outlined was audacious, impossibly illegal, requiring Adelaide to hack into Thornton's personal email, using credentials Maxwell had acquired through methods he declined to specify. While she searched for communication evidence, Maxwell would leverage his MIT network to trace the technical origin of the file alterations, identifying digital fingerprints that would prove the sabotage. This is conspiracy-level activity. Adelaide stared at the laptop Maxwell had given her, preloaded with software she probably shouldn't possess. If we're caught accessing his email without warrant, we're finished anyway. Maxwell's expression was grim but determined. Sometimes survival requires crossing lines you swore you'd never approach. I'm asking you to cross those lines with me. But Adelaide, if you're not comfortable, I'm in. She cut him off, commitment made despite fear churning her stomach. Thornton tried to destroy you and frame me for fraud I didn't commit. Whatever moral lines we cross stopping him are justified by the alternative. They worked through the afternoon and into evening, two people racing against deadline that would determine their futures. Adelaide navigated Thornton's email with methodical precision of someone hunting specific prey, searching for communication that would prove conspiracy. Maxwell assembled technical evidence, building forensic case that would withstand scrutiny. At 6 o'clock, Adelaide found what they needed: email chain between Thornton and Vanessa, discussing strategy for destroying Maxwell's reputation and company valuation. References to The Illustrator and ensuring blame lands appropriately. Bank transfer confirmations showing Vanessa receiving payments from Thornton's offshore accounts. And most damning, communication with freelance medical illustrator Thornton had hired to create the falsified versions of Adelaide's work. Got him. Adelaide's voice shook with relief and residual adrenaline. Complete paper trail linking Thornton to the sabotage and Vanessa as accomplice. This proves everything. Maxwell was beside her instantly, reviewing the evidence with lawyer's precision. His expression shifted from cautious hope to something approaching triumph as he verified the documentation's authenticity. This is enough. With my forensic evidence proving the file alterations and your emails showing conspiracy, we can destroy Thornton's credibility before he destroys us. But when Maxwell tried to download the emails, the screen went black. Then a message appeared in red text that made Adelaide's blood run cold. Nice try, Maxwell, but I've been monitoring my security for weeks, waiting for exactly this kind of desperate move. See you at the board meeting. R.T. They'd been caught. Thornton knew they'd accessed his email, knew they had evidence, and was already moving to neutralize the threat. When Maxwell's phone rang seconds later, it was Jennifer with news that made the situation catastrophically worse. Sir, Thornton just filed emergency restraining order against you and Adelaide, claiming you're harassing him and illegally accessing his personal communications. There are police officers en route to escort you both to the hospital for the board meeting, where you'll be formally charged with harassment and cybercrimes. Maxwell's face went blank, the expression of someone calculating odds and finding them insurmountable. How long do we have? Officers are in the building lobby now, maybe 5 minutes before they reach your floor. The world compressed to singular clarity. They had evidence that could save them, but accessing it illegally had given Thornton ammunition to portray them as desperate criminals willing to break laws to avoid consequences of Adelaide's fraud. The board meeting would become kangaroo court with predetermined outcome. Maxwell removed, Adelaide arrested, Thornton's short position paying out tens of millions, while the company he destroyed burned to ash. Unless they could turn the trap back on the hunter. Change of plans. Maxwell's voice carried the particular steel that came from refusing to accept defeat, even when logic said surrender. We're going to that board meeting. We're going to force Thornton to defend himself publicly, and we're going to make him confess. How? Adelaide heard the desperation in her question, hated it, couldn't suppress it. He has the board votes, police escort, and leverage from us accessing his email. We have evidence we obtained illegally that won't be admissible in any legitimate proceeding. Maxwell's smile was predatory, Businessman recognizing angle no one else had seen. We have something better. We have the truth, my reputation for never backing down, and Thornton's arrogance. Men like him can't resist gloating when they think they've won. We just need to make him believe victory is assured, then provoke him into confessing where witnesses can hear. The plan was insane, dependent on psychology and timing, and Thornton's ego overriding his self-preservation instinct. But they had no alternatives except surrender, and neither Maxwell nor Adelaide had ever learned that particular skill. The police escort was professional and humiliating in equal measure. Officers treating them with wary courtesy that suggested they'd been briefed on high-profile nature of the case. The drive to St. Catherine's Hospital happened in silence, Boston passing in streaks of January cold and early darkness that felt ominous as prophecy. The boardroom where their fate would be decided was all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate and reinforce power hierarchies. Thornton sat at the head of the table, distinguished and confident, surrounded by board members who'd clearly already made their decisions. Sinclair was there too, ice-blonde perfection, barely concealing satisfaction at witnessing Adelaide's destruction. Maxwell entered with Adelaide at his side, his hand on her back in gesture that was equal parts support and possession. He'd insisted she wear the emerald Marchesa gown from their first gala together, armor that reminded everyone she belonged in these rooms, regardless of pedigree. The Harry Winston diamonds glittered at her throat, borrowed legitimacy that was about to become real or be stripped away forever. Maxwell, Adelaide, Thornton's voice dripped false sympathy. Thank you for joining us despite the unfortunate circumstances. I realize this is difficult, but the board has responsibility to shareholders and patients that supersedes personal loyalty. Of course, Maxwell's tone was mild, businessman negotiating terms rather than fighting for survival. Though I'm curious about timeline of this emergency meeting, seems remarkably coordinated with FDA investigation and my ex-wife's memoir release. Thornton's smile never wavered. Pure coincidence. Though I understand you're looking for conspiracy theories to explain your fiancé's fraud and your poor judgment in hiring her. Fiancé, Maxwell corrected quietly. Adelaide is my fiancé, not just employee, and she's not guilty of fraud. Someone framed her by altering her original illustrations and deleting all evidence of her actual work. Convenient theory. Thornton leaned back, confidence radiating from every gesture. Unfortunately, the evidence clearly shows her signature on fraudulent documents submitted to federal regulators. Unless you can produce these mythical originals, we can't. Maxwell's admission sent murmur through the board members. The originals were systematically deleted from our servers by someone with admin-level access and intimate knowledge of our infrastructure. Sinclair jumped in, voice sharp with vindication. So your defense is that Adelaide's work was perfect, but invisible hackers destroyed all evidence and framed her? That's not defense, Maxwell. That's desperate fiction. Is it? Maxwell pulled flash drive from his pocket, held it up for the room to see. Because I have forensic evidence proving when the files were accessed, who had administrative credentials at those times, and digital signatures linking those access points to specific individuals in this room. Thornton's expression flickered, barely perceptible shift from confidence to concern before control reasserted itself. If you had such evidence, you'd have presented it to authorities rather than staging dramatic revelation at board meeting. I would have. Maxwell's voice dropped into register that made everyone in the room lean forward unconsciously. Except the evidence was obtained through methods that wouldn't be admissible in legal proceedings. So instead, I'm presenting it here, to board that has fiduciary duty to investigate fraud within the company before taking precipitous action. He loaded the flash drive into the boardroom's presentation system, and Adelaide watched screens fill with technical documentation she'd helped compile. Server logs, access records, digital fingerprints that painted damning picture of internal sabotage. but crucially, nothing that directly implicated Thornton. The evidence suggested conspiracy without proving it, enough to raise questions but not enough to condemn. Thornton recovered quickly, recognizing the weakness in Maxwell's position. This proves nothing except that someone accessed files. It doesn't exonerate your fiancé of fraud or address the fact that you've lost control of this company's integrity. You're right. Maxwell's concession surprised everyone, including Adelaide, which is why I'm withdrawing as CEO, effective immediately, and recommending the board appoint interim leadership while independent investigation proceeds. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Adelaide stared at Maxwell, trying to understand what strategy could possibly involve surrendering the company he'd spent 15 years building. His hand found hers under the table, squeeze of reassurance that this was part of plan rather than capitulation. However, Maxwell's voice cut through the chaos, commanding attention through sheer force of presence. I have one condition. Before stepping down, I want formal board vote on record regarding the fraud allegations. Specifically, I want each member to state for the record whether they believe Adelaide Harrison knowingly submitted falsified documents, or whether they believe she was framed by internal conspiracy. Thornton's eyes narrowed, recognizing trap but unable to identify its mechanism. That's highly irregular, but entirely reasonable. Maxwell's smile was sharp as surgical steel. After all, we're discussing potential criminal charges against a woman whose only crime was accepting employment at my company. The least we can do is formally record whether this board believes she's guilty or victim. The vote was called, each board member forced to publicly declare position. One by one, they sided with presumption of Adelaide's guilt, swayed by Thornton's preparation and the weight of circumstantial evidence. Sinclair's vote was particularly venomous, satisfaction clear in her voice as she condemned Adelaide's supposed fraud. When Thornton's turn came, he couldn't resist twist of the knife. I vote guilty, naturally. Miss Harrison's fraud has cost this company millions in valuation and irreparably damaged our relationship with FDA. Her prosecution is necessary not just for justice, but as a message that this company maintains highest ethical standards, regardless of personal relationships clouding the CEO's judgment. Interesting phrasing. Maxwell's voice was casual, but Adelaide felt tension radiating from his frame. Particularly the part about personal relationships clouding judgment. Tell me, Richard, do you have any personal relationships that might be clouding your judgment regarding the situation? Thornton's expression went carefully neutral. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm implying that you've taken extraordinary interest in destroying Adelaide's reputation and removing me as CEO. Some might say you're motivated by something beyond fiduciary responsibility. Maxwell leaned forward, predator closing on prey. Some might say you have financial stake in this company's failure. That's absurd. Thornton's voice carried first hint of genuine concern. I'm board chair. My interests are aligned with company success. Then explain the $5 million short position you took on Blackwell MedTech stock 3 weeks ago. Maxwell's voice was steel, wrapped in silk. Explain how you stood to make tens of millions in profit from coordinated attack on our valuation. Explain your relationship with my ex-wife and the payments you've been funneling through offshore accounts. The boardroom went silent, everyone turning to stare at Thornton. His face had drained of color, calculation visible behind his eyes as he weighed denial against damage control. Adelaide held her breath, knowing everything hinged on next few seconds. You can't prove any of that. Thornton's voice was controlled, but strain showed at edges. You're making wild accusations based on illegally obtained information from hacking my personal communications, which, incidentally, I've already reported to authorities and obtained restraining order against. Actually, I can prove it. Adelaide stood, pulling her own tablet from the portfolio bag she'd insisted on bringing. Because while you were focused on Maxwell's forensic evidence, I was documenting every email in your correspondence with Vanessa Hartley, every bank transfer, every communication with the freelance medical illustrator you hired to create falsified versions of my work. She displayed the emails on the boardroom screens, watching Thornton's face go from pale to ashen as evidence of his conspiracy appeared for everyone to see. Messages discussing strategy for destroying Maxwell, references to ensuring blame landed on Adelaide, bank transfers confirming financial relationship between board chair and vengeful ex-wife. "This is illegally obtained," Thornton started, but Maxwell cut him off with savage satisfaction. "Which is why I'm not submitting it to authorities. I'm submitting it to this board as evidence of internal conspiracy requiring immediate investigation." And I'm curious, Richard, are you going to sit there and claim this is fabricated? Because we both know every word, every transfer, every piece of your scheme is documented in correspondence you created. Thornton stared at the screens, at the board members whose expressions had shifted from confident judgment to shocked betrayal, at Maxwell and Adelaide standing united against him. Adelaide watched calculation happen behind his eyes, saw a moment when arrogance overrode self-preservation, when need to justify himself overwhelmed wisdom of silence. "So what if I did?" Thornton's voice carried venom of someone watching careful plans disintegrate. "You think you're untouchable, Maxwell? You think building company from garage makes you special? You're arrogant, emotionally unavailable. Exactly what Vanessa wrote about in her book. This company deserves leadership that understands basic human decency instead of treating everything like engineering problem to be optimized. So you committed fraud, sabotaged medical devices that could have killed patients, framed innocent woman for crimes she didn't commit, all because you disagreed with my management style?" Maxwell's voice was dangerously quiet. "That's your defense?" "My defense is that you don't deserve success you've achieved." Thornton was standing now, composure completely shattered. "You don't deserve her," gesturing at Adelaide. "You don't deserve loyalty of people who built this company alongside you. You're brilliant and cold and incapable of genuine connection. So yes, I conspired with Vanessa. Yes, I hired Illustrator to alter those files. Yes, I shorted the stock and planned to profit from your downfall. Because watching you fail is worth more than money." The confession hung in air, recorded by boardroom's standard meeting documentation, witnessed by 12 people who couldn't unhear admission of conspiracy and fraud and attempted destruction of company they were sworn to protect. Thornton seemed to realize his mistake in the silence that followed, his face cycling through emotions from rage to horror to resignation. He'd been provoked into confessing exactly as Maxwell had predicted, arrogance and hatred overwhelming calculation, destroying himself with words that couldn't be recanted. "I believe we need to revise the agenda." Maxwell's voice carried quiet triumph. "Instead of voting on my removal, I move that Richard Thornton be immediately expelled from this board, stripped of all positions within the company, and reported to appropriate authorities for conspiracy to commit fraud and securities manipulation." The vote was unanimous. Even Sinclair couldn't justify supporting Thornton after witness confession. Police officers who'd been waiting outside were called in, not to arrest Maxwell and Adelaide, but to take Thornton into custody pending investigation. As officers led him away in handcuffs, Thornton's expression was pure hatred focused on Maxwell. "This isn't over. Vanessa's book drops tomorrow. You'll still be destroyed by public opinion even if you've won tonight. Let her publish." Maxwell's voice was calm, no trace of the fear that had driven him to create Article 11 in first place. "I've stopped being afraid of people who mistake emotional walls for weakness. Adelaide taught me that being vulnerable isn't liability. It's the only way to actually live instead of just surviving." The boardroom cleared slowly, members departing with shell-shocked expressions of people who'd witnessed corporate drama that would be dissected for years. Sinclair approached Adelaide on her way out, professional mask firmly in place. "I underestimated you." Sinclair's voice carried grudging respect. "I thought you were temporary distraction, Gold digger using Maxwell for financial security. But you're legitimately talented, and you fight for him in ways I never could. He's lucky to have you." Adelaide nodded acknowledgement, too exhausted for gracious acceptance or resentful rejection. Sinclair departed, leaving Adelaide and Maxwell alone in boardroom that had nearly witnessed their mutual destruction. They stood facing each other across polished table, adrenaline and relief and residual fear creating cocktail of emotions neither knew how to process. Maxwell moved first, closing distance between them in 3 strides, pulling Adelaide against his chest with desperate intensity of someone who'd come within inches of losing everything. "I thought we were finished." His voice was muffled against her hair, vulnerability he would never have shown 4 months ago. When Thornton called the vote, when the board sided with him, I thought, "But we weren't." Adelaide pulled back enough to see his face, reaching up to touch his jaw with gentleness that contradicted the battle they just fought. "We survived because we fought together, because you trusted me enough to build case with illegal evidence, and I trusted you enough to believe the plan would work, even when it seemed impossible." Maxwell captured her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm that was tender, and claiming simultaneously. "Article 11 is officially terminated. The contract ends in 30 days per the terms we violated by confessing feelings, which means you're released from all obligations, free to walk away if you want." "I don't want." Adelaide cut him off, certainty flooding through her. "I didn't fall in love with you because of contract, Maxwell. I fell in love with you despite it, despite every logical reason to maintain professional distance. Despite Article 11 trying to prevent exactly what we became to each other." "What did we become?" His voice was careful, hopeful, still afraid of answers that came too easily after a lifetime of learning that vulnerability invited pain. Adelaide smiled, decision made somewhere between his mother's Christmas dinner and tonight's boardroom confrontation, crystallized in moment when he'd chosen truth over self-protection. Partners, real partners, not contracted ones. People who fight together and trust each other, and maybe, eventually, figure out how to build life that doesn't require legal clauses to define the boundaries. Maxwell kissed her then, deep and claiming, and full of promise that had nothing to do with performance bonuses or public appearances. This was real, messy, imperfect, dangerous in all the ways Article 11 had tried to prevent, and infinitely more valuable because of it. When they finally broke apart, Adelaide's phone buzzed with message from her mother's nurse. Catherine's condition had deteriorated suddenly. Her heart was failing faster than expected. But there was good news too. Her name had just moved to status 1A on the transplant list, highest priority, because her medical condition had become critical. A heart was available. Surgery was scheduled for tomorrow morning. "I have to go." Adelaide's voice shook with overwhelming mix of relief and terror. "She's getting her transplant. After 18 months of waiting, she's finally, but it's because she's gotten worse, Maxwell. What if we'll go together?" Maxwell was already moving, gathering her coat, calling for his driver. "You're not facing this alone, not anymore." The hospital waiting room during transplant surgery was its own circle of purgatory, hours stretching into eternity while surgeons worked, and Adelaide tried not to imagine all the ways things could go catastrophically wrong. Maxwell stayed beside her the entire time, his hand anchoring her to reality when panic threatened to spiral into worst-case scenarios. When Dr. Morrison finally emerged 12 hours later, his exhausted smile told them everything before words could. The surgery was successful. Catherine's new heart is beating strong. She'll need months of recovery and anti-rejection medication. But barring complications, she should make full recovery. Adelaide collapsed against Maxwell, tears she'd been holding for 18 months finally breaking free. He held her through the crying, his own eyes wet with empathy for her relief, sharing joy that had nothing to do with contracts and everything to do with caring about her happiness more than his own emotional protection. They sat with Catherine as she woke from anesthesia, her smile weak but genuine when she saw Adelaide's face. "Baby girl, you look happy." "I am, Mom." Adelaide squeezed her mother's hand gently, careful of IV lines and monitors. "You're going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay now." Catherine's eyes moved to Maxwell standing at the foot of the bed. Recognition and approval clear despite medication fog. "You take care of my daughter. She's stubborn and works too hard, and deserves someone who sees how special she is." "I see it." Maxwell's voice was steady, commitment made without hesitation. "Every day, I see it more clearly." 6 weeks passed in blur of recovery and rebuilding. Catherine progressed through physical therapy with determination that Adelaide had clearly inherited, her new heart giving her strength she hadn't possessed in years. Vanessa's memoir dropped and briefly created media sensation, but without Thornton's sabotage amplifying the message, it was dismissed as bitter ex-wife's vindictive fantasy rather than devastating exposé. Public opinion, seeing Maxwell's handling of the crisis and his obvious devotion to Adelaide and her mother, sided with him rather than Vanessa's narrative. The FDA investigation concluded with Blackwell MedTech cleared of all wrongdoing, Adelaide exonerated publicly, and Thornton facing federal charges for conspiracy and securities fraud. The company's stock price recovered and exceeded previous highs, investors reassured by Maxwell's handling of crisis and internal reforms implemented to prevent future sabotage. Article 11's termination date arrived on a February morning that felt more like beginning than ending. Maxwell and Adelaide stood in his office, their office now, Adelaide having formally accepted position as Chief Medical Illustration Officer, with equity stake that made her genuine partner rather than employee. Contracts officially terminated as of today. Maxwell held up the original document they'd both signed 4 months ago. All obligations fulfilled or superseded by changed circumstances. Performance bonus forfeited per terms we violated, which means legally we're no longer bound by any agreement. Legally. Adelaide took the contract from his hands, studied Article 11 one last time, the clause that had tried to prevent exactly what they'd become to each other. But we're bound by something more important than legal agreements. What's that? Maxwell's voice was soft, intimate, the tone he used now when they were alone, and the walls had come down completely. Choice. Adelaide set the contract aside, took both his hands in hers. We choose each other. Not because contract says we have to, not because financial incentives align, not because it's strategically advantageous, just because being together makes us better than we are apart. Maxwell pulled her close, kissed her with a kind of tenderness that came from no longer being afraid of feelings he'd spent years trying to control. "I choose you, every day for the rest of my life, if you'll let me." The proposal wasn't grand gesture in expensive restaurant or carefully planned romantic moment. It was just truth spoken in office where they'd first made dangerous bargain that had transformed them both. Adelaide's answer was, kiss that promised forever without needing words to make commitment official. April arrived with Boston spring, the city shedding winter gray for tentative green that promised renewal. The wedding they'd planned together, real wedding, not performance for shareholders, took place in the private garden where Maggie insisted all important Blackwell family events occurred. Catherine walked Adelaide down the grass aisle, her new heart strong enough to make the journey without assistance, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed daughter's joy. Maggie sat in the front row beside Catherine, unlikely friendship between working-class transplant survivor and old money matriarch becoming one of Adelaide's favorite unexpected consequences of this entire journey. Maxwell waited at the makeshift altar, no longer the controlled businessman who'd approached desperate waitress with calculated proposition. He was simply man in love, wearing his heart visibly for first time in years, trusting that vulnerability wouldn't destroy him, but would instead create something worth protecting. The vows they exchanged were simple: personal, free from legal clauses or contractual obligations. Just promises two people made because they meant them, because they'd learned through trial and terror that love wasn't liability to be managed, but gift to be protected. I promise to break Article 11 every single day for the rest of our lives. Maxwell's smile was tender, callback to the clause that had tried to keep them apart. I promise to choose vulnerability over control, emotion over calculation, and you over everything else. Adelaide's voice shook with happy tears. I promise to choose you every day. No contract needed, no performance required. Just us, building life together one honest moment at a time. The kiss sealed promises that legal documents couldn't capture, love that clauses couldn't contain, partnership that had survived sabotage and scandal, and their own fears about opening hearts that had learned too many times that trust invited pain. The reception flowed into evening, guests celebrating union that had started as business transaction and transformed into something genuine through proximity and crisis and stubborn refusal to accept that feelings could be legislated away. Adelaide danced with Maxwell under string lights as spring darkness settled over Boston, and everything felt possible in ways it hadn't when she'd been drowning in medical debt and desperate enough to sign contract with billionaire stranger. I have something for you. Maxwell pulled small folded paper from his pocket, cocktail napkin from hotel bar where he'd first proposed this entire arrangement. Our final contract. Adelaide unfolded it carefully, found his handwriting covering the surface. The final clause, Party A, Maxwell, and Party B, Adelaide, hereby agree to break the emotional attachment termination clause, joyfully and with extreme prejudice every single day for the rest of their lives. Effective date, forever. Penalties for non-compliance, none. Love has no penalties. Signed, Maxwell Sterling Blackwell. Signed. She laughed through tears, pulled pen from her clutch, added signature below his. This is the best contract you've ever written. Binding for lifetime. Maxwell folded the napkin carefully, placed it in his breast pocket near his heart. No escape clauses, no termination dates, no Article 11 to protect us from feelings we're supposed to have. I don't want escape. Adelaide pulled him close, swaying to music that wasn't quite rhythm they'd established, perfectly imperfect like everything about their journey. I want forever with you, Maxwell. Real forever, not contracted one. Then forever is what we'll build. His voice carried certainty that came from no longer being afraid of vulnerability, from understanding that some risks were worth taking even when outcome couldn't be controlled. Together, 2 years later, morning coffee rituals where Maxwell made her café con leche and she left articles about medical innovation beside his Wall Street Journal had become sacred routine. Late nights in her studio, while he worked in adjacent office, created comfortable silence of people who didn't need constant conversation to feel connected. Board meetings where they presented together showcased partnership recognized and respected by company that had nearly been destroyed by conspiracy but emerged stronger. The Art of Anatomy was published to critical acclaim, Adelaide's definitive medical illustration textbook used in medical schools nationwide. The dedication read, "For Catherine, who taught me that love is the greatest risk worth taking, and for Maxwell, who taught me that hearts grow stronger when shared." Maxwell's company had expanded beyond neurosurgical devices into comprehensive medical technology platform, innovation driven by commitment to saving lives rather than maximizing profits. The foundation they created together funded medical care for families facing catastrophic expenses, ensuring no one else had to make bargains with strangers because healthcare system valued money over human life. Catherine visited every Sunday for dinner, her health maintained by anti-rejection medication, but fundamentally transformed from the dying woman Adelaide had been desperate to save. She and Maggie had become unlikely best friends, bonding over shared love for Maxwell and Adelaide, and mutual determination to ensure their grandchildren, not yet arrived but inevitable, would be spoiled appropriately. The penthouse no longer felt like museum of emotional sterility. Adelaide's art covered the walls, Maxwell's engineering journals mixed with her sketchbooks on every surface. Evidence of lives fully integrated rather than occupying separate wings. The East and West divisions had been eliminated during renovation, symbolic and literal removal of boundaries that had once seemed necessary for survival. On quiet evenings, they'd sit at the windows overlooking Boston Common, watching city lights reflect patterns too complex to predict or control. Maxwell would pull the framed cocktail napkin from the mantel, their final contract, preserved as reminder of journey from transaction to truth. Best decision I ever made. Maxwell's voice carried contentment Adelaide had learned to recognize as his version of happiness, hard-won and carefully protected. Approaching desperate waitress with audacious proposition that terrified us both. Best decision I ever made was saying yes. Adelaide leaned against him, their bodies fitting together with practiced ease. Even though every logical calculation said signing that contract would destroy me, even though Article 11 was designed to prevent exactly what we became. The clause failed spectacularly. Maxwell's smile was fond, no longer afraid of feelings that had once seemed like liabilities. Turns out love doesn't respond well to legal prohibitions or contractual limitations. It just exists, demanding to be acknowledged regardless of penalties. Adelaide thought about the journey from that first wedding, where he'd rescued her from humiliation, to this life they'd built together through crisis and choice. You know what nobody tells you about love? It's not the falling that's hard. It's the staying, the choosing each other every day, even when it's difficult, even when chemistry fades into comfortable familiarity, even when being together requires work instead of just feeling effortless. And you still choose me? Maxwell's question carried hint of old vulnerability, lingering fear that someday she'd realize she'd settled for arrangement rather than genuine partnership. Every single day. Adelaide turned to face him fully, green eyes meeting blue with absolute certainty. Not because I have to, not because we signed anything, but because building this life with you is the best thing I've ever done. You taught me that vulnerability is courage rather than weakness, and that some contracts are meant to be broken so reality can exceed what we thought possible. Maxwell kissed her then, tender and claiming simultaneously, relationship that had started as desperate bargain transformed into love story neither had believed they deserved, but both had fought to protect. Outside the windows, Boston glittered with promise of millions of lives intersecting in patterns they'd never fully understand. But inside the penthouse, two people who'd learned to trust despite every reason not to, built their future, one honest moment at a time. No contracts needed, no clauses defining boundaries, no Article 11 preventing feelings that made life worth living instead of just surviving. Just love, imperfect and real, and infinitely more valuable than any performance bonus could measure. Just Maxwell and Adelaide, proving every day that the best rules are the ones broken by hearts brave enough to risk everything for chance at genuine connection. Just them, together, choosing each other across every challenge and triumph, an ordinary moment that added up to extraordinary life. Forever, binding without signatures, secured by something stronger than legal documents could ever contain. Forever, built on foundation of trust earned through crisis, survived together. Forever, because some things, some people are worth every risk.